Hi, my name is Natalie Sherman, and my thesis is titled The Barbie Effect, The Value of Women in the Workforce. I chose this topic for my thesis because I'd heard before a statistic that businesses employing more women are more profitable, but I wasn't sure why this was or specifically what the statistics said. And as I'm going to law school next year, I know that women are greatly underrepresented in that field. I wanted to find out what holds women back from taking up the same amount of space as men in the workplace. I titled this project The Barbie Effect because in a lot of fields, Barbie was the leading woman, including the first female president and the first person to go to space. So, although this isn't a coined term by any means, it's a fitting way to describe the intersection of femininity with the workplace that I wanted to look into. This project is important because the statistics that I'll go into in a minute do in fact show that businesses are more profitable when they employ more women and have women in leadership positions. So not only is this important because of its impact on businesses, but also because women still do not have parity in the workplace. And although we've made great strides for gender equality as a whole over the last 100 years, we still have a lot further to go. So the question specifically that I wanted to answer was, are businesses more profitable when they employ more women? Why? And then why is gender parity in the workplace still leaving something to be desired? If businesses do better when they hire more women, why aren't women being employed at the same rates as men, especially in those higher level positions? So my thesis was, since women first entered the workforce and began to take up an increasing number of jobs across fields, there's been a noticeable advancement in the structure, competitiveness, and profitability of businesses employing and run by women. And as far as I was able to tell, this was true. I first took a historical look at the history of women in the workforce, as well as the legislation then and now, and how it has changed, basically how politics interacts with this issue. And then I took a sociological look at why women are still not reaching parity in the workforce, as well as a few other downfalls like the wage gap. What I found was that in as many places as women seem to be reaching equality, they are also falling behind. Women make up 50.8% of the population, so a majority. Women earn 57% of undergraduate degrees and 59% of all master's degrees. But in the legal world, women constitute 45% of associates, 22.7% of partners, and only 19% of equity partners. Women represent 40% of all physicians and surgeons, but only 16% of permanent medical school deans. Women earn the majority of doctorates for the last 8 years, but are only 32% of full-time professors and 30% of college presidents. Women constitute 61% of accountants and auditors, 53% of financial managers, but only 37% of financial analysts and 12.5% of CFOs of Fortune 500 companies. Women make up 24% of Congress and hold 28% of seats in the state legislatures. These statistics are important because it shows that this discrepancy isn't just in one field. It's not concentrated. The inequality at these higher level positions stretches across all fields. I found that the statistic that I had heard about was true. When looking at companies to invest in, there are many predictors for good financial results, but one important component to consider is the gender makeup of those in charge. Studies show that women in executive positions on our corporate boards can have a positive impact on the company's performance, and the more diverse the C-suite is, the better margins, profits, and total return for shareholders. Women in management positions are correlated to an average annual return of the company. Companies with 24% female participation had an annualized return of 22.8% over the last 5 years, while those with 33% women in management had a 25.6% annual return, and this is compared to an 11% return for the average company during the same period. In a study including 353 of the Fortune 500 companies, those with a high representation of women in their senior leadership teams had a 35% higher return on equity and 34% higher total shareholder return than male-dominant firms. So, while studies, even more than those that I just discussed, show companies with more female executives make more money, only 10.9% of the world's largest 500 companies have female senior executives, and 37% of these companies have all-male leadership teams, with an additional 21% having only one woman. But the evidence shows that gender diversity in management has a positive impact on a company's performance. And a survey completed by 21,980 firms across 91 different countries found that having women at the C suite level significantly increases net margins. A profitable firm with 30% of leaders being women could expect to add 1 or more percentage points to its net margin compared to a similar firm with no female leaders, or equivalent to a 15% rise in profitability. On the whole, most companies are still very gender imbalanced, especially at the top. And the studies also show that female CEOs neither outperform or underperform male colleagues, but rather that it is important to have more women in top management positions, not just a female CEO. Board membership and the CEO matter less than having women across all top positions, at a minimum of 1 in 3 top executive positions being filled by women in order for a company to see an increased revenue. But why does this happen, and why is this difference so severe? While the exact cause for each company can differ, studies agree that introducing new voices into management roles brings a fresh perspective. Essentially, diversity is a strength. Women have access to different pipelines of employees, and because the path to management roles for women is so much harder than for men, the women who do make it to the top are the most talented and qualified. Diverse companies are more creative, and companies with women in top management roles have innovation intensity and produce 20% more patents than teams with male leaders. Essentially, women increase a firm's skill diversity. And this doesn't just have ramifications for women, but for human development as a whole. If women were to participate in the economy equal to men, it could add up to $28 trillion to the annual GDP in 2025, as compared with a business as usual scenario. So why, if women are so beneficial to the workplace and the economy, are they underrepresented in almost every field at the higher level? There are lots of reasons, including a history of oppression, with women only getting the right to vote 100 years ago. The glass ceiling is a big reason, including traditional gender roles and gender bias. 40% of people say that they notice a double standard against female candidates, and men are 1.5 times more likely to be hired over a woman. The glass ceiling also includes the motherhood penalty, covering sexual harassment, discrimination, and the gender pay gap. At companies where 90% of the leadership is male, half of the men at the company believe that women are well represented. One sort of an inconsistency that I was able to find was a part of gender bias. It said that companies that are struggling tend to go with what's considered to be a safe hire, which would be a man, while companies that are already successful can take a risk and hire a woman. This could mean that oftentimes women at the top of successful companies could have been brought in after the company was already successful. However, I did not find conclusive data to support this, rather just that men are seen as safer hires rather than women as a part of traditional gender roles and gender bias. And another inconsistency I was able to find was the discrepancy with the wage gap. So this is still a highly debated topic on why the wage gap exists, if it even exists, and if it's good or bad. Some people argue that the gender wage gap is a reflection of maternity leave and experience-based pay. However, the gender wage gap is a result of many factors, including occupational segregation, bias against working mothers, and direct pay discrimination, as well as racial bias, age, and access to education. Women are still paid about 20% less than men, and this is greatly created due to the levels where women work within organizations. Female full-time, year-round workers still make 82 cents for every dollar earned by a man. In fact, an analysis of women and men's earnings over 15 years found that women made just half of what men earned. And in almost every occupation for which there's sufficient earnings data for both men and women in order to calculate an earnings ratio, women earn less than men. And in middle skill positions, workers in jobs mainly done by women earn 66% of what workers in jobs mainly done by men earn. And if change continues at the same pace it has for the last 50 years, it will still take until 2059 for women to reach pay parity, and even longer for women of color. Now, the reasons for the gender wage gap are multifaceted, and irrespective of the level of qualification, jobs predominantly held by women pay less on average than those predominantly done by men, and there has been little gender integration of work. Some industries like construction haven't made progress for the last 40 years. Another factor to consider is emotional labor, or that women feel the need to keep the peace lest they be seen as emotional, meaning they are less likely to argue their pay or ask for a raise, and more likely to do extra work when asked without compensation. I would conclude with what my original thesis holds, that jobs employing more women are more profitable, as the statistics and studies that I found all pointed towards this across any field and around the world. Large and small scale studies all found that when businesses integrate their workplace, and especially their higher level positions, they do better. In my research, I did not find facts to counter this other than what I've already discussed. And the reason women are still so scarce in upper level positions is because of the glass ceiling and all that it entails, including gender bias and microaggressions, as well as the motherhood penalty. The playing field still isn't level for women, but doing so would benefit our economy, our investments, and our businesses.